Hi, I'm Barb Hammer, and I'm Director of the Office of Disability Services at the University of Missouri, and I'm going to talk to you today about Universal Design for Learning. I'm going to start by just making clear that as Director of Disability Services, I do not teach. I support the students. I work with students with disabilities. I have for the last 13 years, and what I have seen over that time is that embracing the concept of universal design can make a huge difference in terms of the enhancing the potential and the capacity for students with disabilities to engage in the learning environment. People get tired of hearing me say that I think a lot of students with disabilities, those that I know, are like square pegs trying to fit into a round hole, and that the structure, the traditional design of teaching that we have followed tends to create significant barriers for those students, and by taking a different approach we might have more success in seeing their retention and their graduation. So let's talk about universal design for learning. You can refer to universal design for learning as universal design for instruction, universally designed instruction, universal course design, universal instructional design, or universal design or inclusive design for learning. I'm going to refer to it today as universal design for learning, UDL. I thought I would just put up one slide that gives you a sense of the diversity of our student population. This is data from the National Center for Education Statistics 2010, and gives you at least a snapshot of the diversity of student population, including those with racial and ethnic backgrounds, students whose first language is not English, students with disabilities, and of course non-traditional age students, those 25 and over. And we have seen a significant increase in the number of those students over the last 10 years or so, plus. So why is UDL important? Why is it that we're even talking about it? Well, again, certainly from where I sit, the approach to ensuring that students with disabilities can participate in higher education has been driven by a legalistic and reactive approach. One that says, well, we have to come into the environment and we have to make modifications, we have to make accommodations based on the specific student's needs. And it's a retrofit to something that exists in the environment. Well, universal design for learning is different because it's proactive and it has as its goal the full inclusion of all students. The focus is not necessarily just on students with disabilities, but it obviously can be a benefit to that population. But it really is focusing on all students regardless of disability, race, gender, place of origin, first language, learning style, and so on. And universal design for learning really addresses the barriers. It helps someone avoid erecting the physical barriers for students with mobility impairments, or sensory barriers for students with visual and hearing impairments, or language barriers for students whose first language is not English, and so on. It fits very nicely into what we call the social model of disability, which is that the disability is not a part of the person, but of the environment in which the person interacts and engages. So let's talk about the principles of universal design again. Let's start with that. The Center for Universal Design at North Carolina State University is where those original principles of universal design came from. Those principles have been around for quite some time now and have helped shape the thinking about universal design generally across the country. These principles can be applied in an instructional environment. They aren't quite comprehensive enough, which you will see here in a minute. But there is a way to take each one of these principles and apply them to an instructional environment. Let's go through some of these. Equitable use, which is that the design is useful and marketable to people with diverse abilities. Well, Let's talk about a website. Let's talk about Blackboard. Let's talk about other kinds of course management systems. What you would want is to have those programs to be designed so that they're accessible to everyone, including students who are blind and use text-to-speech software. Flexibility in use, which is talking about accommodating a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. Well, let's talk about going to visit, say, a museum, or going into an auditorium where there might be information being presented. What you want to do is allow each student in that instructional environment to be able to choose to read or listen to the information that's being presented in a manner that works best with him or herself. Simple and intuitive, that's pretty straightforward. You want something that's easy to understand regardless of the user's experience or language skills, knowledge, or even their concentration level. So if you're working with equipment, that you'd want control buttons to be clearly labeled with both text and symbols, for example, that are simple and intuitive to understand. Perceptible information. That's where you're talking about the design communicating necessary information which is effective to the user regardless of the conditions around that person or the user's sensory abilities. Well, this one's a big one for me because it's really talking about the kind of thing we rely on so much anymore, which is software, technology, the internet, videos. If you're doing a video, if you're going to be offering a video presentation in a course, include the captions so that it is actually communicating the necessary information effectively to the user, regardless of the user's sensory abilities. Tolerance for error, which is talking about minimizing hazards and adverse consequences or unintended consequences. Well, when you're designing software, for example, what you want to do is have software that provides guidance or background information so that if somebody makes a response that's inappropriate or makes a mistake and goes to the wrong place, that there are checks and balances to get you back where you need to go that are straightforward and easy to work with. Low physical effort, a classroom building. Wanting to have a classroom building that allows for people to get in and navigate easily. Doors into the building, doors into a lecture hall or a classroom that are easy to open and close or might even be automatic so that there's really no physical effort involved in getting in and out of the building. Post offices are a great example when you're talking about non-instructional environments, but certainly going into a classroom building, if it has the automatic entrances so that even just by passing past a sensor, you can get into the building, get into the lecture hall, so much better. Size and space for approach and use, of course, is talking about reach, manipulation, use regardless of the user's body size, posture, or mobility. If you have a laboratory environment, you want to provide flexibility in the workspace so that if a student is left or right-handed or maybe has some limitations in upper extremities, that they still may be able to manipulate and use different things, or possibly different sizes and heights of workstations so that they might be able to work from a standing or a seated position. So those are the basic principles of universal design, and I've talked a little bit about how those work. What happened is that there was some research done at the University of Connecticut. They did a review of literature on universal design, on effective instruction, and on teaching students with learning disabilities. And the researchers ended up identifying what they considered two additional principles of universal design: community of learners and instructional climate. A community of learners is really talking about an instructional environment that promotes interaction and communication among the students and between students and faculty. And instructional climate is really talking about that the instruction and the environment is designed to be welcoming and inclusive, and that high expectations are very clearly stated for all students. In other words, no student is thought to be less than capable of learning in that environment. And the Center for Applied Special Technology in the late 1980s really began to work on expanding even further the idea of universal design. And they really focused on educational software, particularly in K through 12 environments, and came up with these additional principles that are really very specific to instructional settings and build on the concept of differentiated instruction. And this is where you really talk about multiple means of representation, multiple means of expression, and multiple means of engagement. What do those mean? Well, multiple means of representation is where you're delivering your course content in flexible formats, where you're allowing students to make some of their own adjustments to the material and offering a choice of materials and access for the students. Multiple means of action and expression is really talking about offering a variety of methods for students to respond to the class content. For example, responding to a discussion question with a video rather than a text, or allowing students to demonstrate their acquired knowledge through some means other than a 50-minute multiple choice exam. What a concept. And then multiple means of engagement is talking about planning for a variety of engagement strategies. So not just individual activities, but individual and group activities, projects, papers, different kinds of things like that. Again, the idea behind these principles is establishing a curriculum, designing a course that includes alternatives to make it accessible and really applicable to the students with different backgrounds, different learning styles, different abilities and disabilities, and really, frankly, minimizes the need for add-ons and for assistive technology of one kind or another. So how do we go about implementing some of these things? Well, class climate. What you want to do in class climate is adopt principles and practices that reflect high values with respect to both diversity and inclusiveness. So, number one, avoid stereotyping. Don't assume that members of certain groups will automatically do better or do less well, or may require certain types of assistance, but offer instruction and support based on student performance and requests. Interactions. Encourage regular and effective interactions between students and the instructor, and ensure that communication methods are accessible to all participants. Essentially, promote effective communication. Use interactive teaching techniques. I mean, some basic things, some things that are very obvious. You just want to face the class. You want to speak clearly. You want to use a microphone. If your voice is not real, if you don't project well, make sure that you're using the technology that will allow your voice to project for everyone in the room to be able to hear you. Make eye contact with the students. Connect with them as you're talking with them. Certainly, when possible and to the extent possible, consider saying to every student in the class, I'm going to expect to meet with you at least once during the course, maybe even more often than that. And certainly, because of the use of course management systems that we have now, you can supplement the in-person contact with online communication of different kinds, and some other kind of basic things that have to do with the interaction. Making sure that you're using straightforward language, to the extent possible, again, minimizing jargon, and addressing students by name to the extent possible when you are communicating with them, whether in person or electronically. Physical environment and materials. You're really talking here about ensuring that your facilities, your activities, your materials, and your equipment are physically accessible to and usable by all students, and that all potential student characteristics are addressed in safety considerations. So how would we do that? Well, arrange seating to encourage participation. So maybe not just those straight rows with everybody facing the front. But you want to make sure that students have a clear line of sight to the instructor and to visual aids. A big issue for me, because of the student population I work with, make sure that you allow room for things like wheelchairs, classroom assistants, personal assistants, sign language interpreters or captioners, and the use of assistive technology in the classroom. I have to say, I've been struck by the times in the years I've been here that we've had instructors who have not allowed for a sign language interpreter or a captioner to be at the front of the room or positioned in a place that's close to the student where the student needs it. And I think it's a lack of understanding when that objection is raised. It's also helpful to minimize whatever distractions you can, because you may have students in your class who have attention challenges. So if you're having small groups work together, try to create as quiet an environment as possible so that they actually can focus with each other. Working within constraints to make the environment as inclusive as possible may be a challenge if you are in a big university environment, because there are other people who have responsibility for that classroom furniture and that classroom arrangement. But to the extent that you can, you want to have some control over that environment to make it work. And that's where you, speaking to your administrators, your higher ups, to make sure that they understand that this is helpful to have this kind of flexibility in the classroom is important. Delivery methods. Use multiple and accessible instructional methods that are accessible to all learners. We're not just talking here about software. We're not just talking about technology here. This may be something as straightforward as just providing cognitive supports as you're teaching content, summarizing major points, giving background and contextual information, providing some sort of scaffolding tools, maybe some sort of outline or class notes, copies of the materials that you're showing in your slides, so that students have a way to go back and review that material again. Delivering any of those in more than one method is helpful, so perhaps in a printed form and also in an electronic format. And then giving students an opportunity to get further background information, to build on their vocabulary, to build on their practice with the different kinds of supports that you're providing. And certainly encourage and support students to create their own scaffolding materials within the classroom environment, because the more involved they are in this process, the greater the chance that they're going to retain and learn the material. Information resources and technology. Well, here you want to ensure that course materials, notes, and other information resources are engaging, flexible, and accessible for all students. Here we go again, all students. Pick your materials early, and pick the materials that are going to be accessible. Choose printed materials and prepare a syllabus early so that students have the option of beginning to read materials or work on assignments before the course begins. If they have an interest in doing that, is there a problem with them doing that? You want to make sure that you're also allowing sufficient time, if it's necessary, to arrange for alternative formats. So when students are using a textbook and they need to have that textbook in an alternative format and it's not available through the publisher and it's not available elsewhere, there may need to be some formatting work done, and sometimes that takes time. So to the extent possible, being prepared to have that material ready before class starts helps anyone who's involved in that process. Feedback and assessment. Provide specific feedback on a regular basis and regularly assess student progress using multiple accessible methods and tools. This is beginning to sound like a broken record, I think. Multiple, accessible, and adjust instruction accordingly. Essentially, the more feedback you can give to students throughout a course and through that learning process, the better. You're allowing students to have opportunities for correction, for review. Give them an opportunity to resubmit so that they can correct mistakes that they've made in assignments and exams. And certainly it may be very helpful if you can actually arrange for feedback among peers when that seems appropriate. And finally, with respect to assessment, you want to keep your academic standards consistent for all students, including those who require accommodations. Your syllabus should have very clear statements regarding the course expectations, a straightforward grading rubric, a description of the assignments, deadlines, as well as assessment methods and dates. All of that information should be very clear in the syllabus, and again should be very consistent even for those students who do require the accommodations. And finally, there are going to be times when, even though you may work very hard in advance and upfront to design your course to be universally accessible, you may still need to arrange for accommodations where the course design just can't meet that need. And in that case, what you want to do is make sure that you know the protocols on your own campus for getting materials in alternative formats, for rescheduling a classroom. We have a building here on campus where there's a lecture hall, and the only way to get into the lecture hall is actually to use a lift, because there is a set of stairs to get in. So if you have a person in a wheelchair, they have to use the lift. This just happens to be a very old and ineffective lift that most of the time does not work. So it's good to be aware of that so that you know you can move that classroom if you need to in order to ensure that that student can get there. You also want to make sure that assistive technology is available, no matter where it's used, if it's in a computing lab, in a science lab, and any other kind of accommodation that may come up. Being aware and being flexible and prepared to arrange for those or to work with the student to ensure that they're there is good. I have a list of resources on this final slide. These are all excellent resources that tell you about Universal Design for Learning, that provide a lot more information than what I have provided today. This is just an absolutely tip of the iceberg. I would certainly strongly recommend the Do It project at University of Washington. The National Center on Universal Design for Learning, of course, is going to have copious amounts of information. Two of these resources, web accessibility through WebAIM and PowerPoint accessibility, are both very, very concrete and specific sites to help you to know how to do certain things, how to make your website accessible, how to make your PowerPoints accessible, how to work with online course materials to make sure that they're accessible. And then our professional association, Association for Higher Education and Disability, has a section that lists a number of universal design resources which you may find helpful. I hope this has been a good start for you on exploring the idea of universal design for learning. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.